thank you so much for joining us. And I appreciate it that you guys are dialing in from all over the world. We have someone from Pakistan, we have Japanese representative, and someone from India. I'm so thrilled to have you guys here. My name is Vili, and I'm the Membership and Governance Director at the Linguistic Society of America. And I'm very grateful to work with Catherine Anderson and Michal Temkin Martinez from the Scholarly Teaching Special Interest Group for the webinar content today on publishing in teaching and linguistics. Before I'm passing the virtual microphone to them, I invite everyone to mute your microphone during the first part of the webinar so that we can listen to our panelists. If you have any questions throughout the content, please send them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the conversations. Otherwise, enjoy the webinars, and over to you, Michal and Catherine.
All right. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. In today's webinar, we'll be walking you through the process of publishing and teaching linguistics. Both Catherine and I are associate editors of the Teaching Linguistics section of the journal Language. And so we are excited to host this, and we have a short presentation for you. And we've left plenty of time afterwards for questions. You can put them in the chat, as Vee mentioned, or you can raise your hand at the end during the Q&A, and we will address your questions. We hope that you find this session helpful. So my name is Michal Temkin Martinez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a professor and the chair of the linguistics department at Boise State University.
And I'm Catherine Anderson. I also use she, her pronouns. I'm a teaching stream professor in the Department of Linguistics and Languages at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, which is kind of between Toronto and Buffalo. And I'm also the director of the Gender and Social Justice program there. And I just came on as associate editor this year in 2024. So I'm learning lots. It's very exciting. One of the most exciting things is that there is a special section in the journal Language. It's been around for more than 10 years. And the existence of this section in the journal shows the LSA's commitment to the value of scholarly teaching and the scholarship of teaching and learning, because it provides this peer-reviewed venue for scholarship about teaching in linguistics and builds capacity for that work by disseminating the work that scholarly teachers are doing. The readership of Language is largely people doing and teaching linguistics in universities, but we do have some members who are teaching linguistics in high schools. And again, largely in North America. It's the Linguistic Society of America. So the bulk of the audience is people in the US and Canada, but obviously not everybody, because many of you here today are from outside the US and Canada. One really nice thing about the Teaching Linguistics section is that a publication in Teaching Linguistics is a publication in Language, which is the flagship journal of the Linguistic Society of America. And well, it depends how you count these things, but it's one of the most well-known and prestigious journals in linguistics. So publishing in this venue matters to your various performance and tenure and merit reviews, and possibly your employability as well. So that's another way that shows the value of this work.
So many of us here on the call either know about scholarly teaching or are actual practitioners of it. So we thought we'd walk you through what scholarly teaching is, what the scholarship of teaching and learning is, and then talk about what it is that we're interested in our section. So scholarly teaching involves the effective teaching methods that are grounded in evidence-based practices. So that means you examine your own teaching and you assess your teaching's effectiveness and the learning of your students. And it also means changing your own practices based on what you learn from others and from your own assessments. And so you may have also heard about scholarship of teaching and learning, or SOTL, or SOTL, and that is the scholarly sharing of knowledge about teaching through publications and presentations. And many of us have either participated in workshops or read articles published in SOTL. And because we were curious about learning good teaching practices, once we actually adopt these practices and reflect on them, we're considered scholarly teachers. And scholarly teachers can actually then participate in SOTL by publishing or presenting themselves. So in essence, scholarly teaching and SOTL sort of feed into one another. And what is SOTL? So it's the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. It uses sound methods to examine student learning. It's grounded in theory and literature, and it systematically shares findings with other scholars and practitioners. And publishing your SOTL work in the Teaching Linguistics section of language is one way in participating in SOTL.
And so we hope that you choose this venue for participating in that sharing. There's two kinds of submissions that we consider for publication. The first one is what you might think of as a traditional research article, but the research is about teaching and learning. So this is an empirical contribution. It's going to have data, not necessarily quantitative data, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. It's not necessarily grades or multiple choice scores. There are other things that count as data. But importantly, this is going to be data from humans, right? So we need you to tell us about your IRB, REB, your ethics board approval for research with human participants, of course. But you can do just by putting a sentence in the manuscript, right? This research was reviewed by whatever the standard formula is for your institution. And those can be slightly longer articles. If it gets more than about 12,000 words, then you'll want to have a conversation with us because that's a lot. And then the other kind of article that we're seeing a bit more of these days, right, Michal, is the innovations papers. These aren't necessarily research. They don't necessarily have data, but maybe you've done something neat that you think other linguists should know about. So maybe it's a pedagogical technique, maybe it's some kind of collaboration. Importantly, it's not just, here's what I did in my class, isn't this neat? Of course, you also, it's still a scholarly paper, so you also want to give the context and ground it in the literature and tell us why you did it. So the innovations papers might not have data in them, but you still, of course, want them to be scholarly and grounded in the literature. Okay, so one of the ways that we build capacity for scholarly teaching and for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is to support you in developing your paper. So the review process takes a slightly different angle from what you might think of as a more conventional review process. And we ask our reviewers to give formative advice rather than gatekeeping. So we ask our reviewers to give reviews that will help you strengthen the paper, will help make it become publishable. So that's part of our work in supporting you in doing this kind of scholarship, because it might be novel to people who are trained in disciplinary methods. And then we have a little more that we figured sharing with you the guidelines that we send to reviewers might help you think about how to shape your paper. So these are the literal questions that we give to reviewers when we're asking them to review. So you probably want to consider them as you're working on your paper. So that first question, this is the gatekeeping question here. Does the article address the teaching of linguistics or the use of linguistic concepts or theory in teaching? And so this is a bright line for if the paper is about teaching language, then it might not be suitable for teaching linguistics. If it's a paper about teaching English as an alternate language or language, that's the most common submission that has to get turned away. So really it's about teaching linguistics as a subject, or at least using linguistic theory in teaching. So that's the first one that you really want to get out of the way clearly, not out of the way, that you want to make sure you address up front. And then we ask you to describe what's the pedagogical issue. Were your students struggling with something? Did you update your course in a certain way to address some conditions? We also want to know about your positionality and your context, because teaching is, of course, profoundly local. It's about your relationship with your students. And so there are things that you are sharing with the wider audience, but how the wider audience interprets and applies your findings is going to depend on how they interpret your context and your positionality. So unlike some kinds of empirical research, we want you to tell us who you are and what your context is. There's no need for I've forgotten the phrase. Anyway, that supposedly objective, external, omniscient narrator. Okay, let me find my next notes here. Right, so you've told us about your own context, and then you also want to think about ways that your findings might apply to people in other contexts as well. So that what should your reader take away from your context? Something we find is that sometimes people new to the scholarship of teaching and learning believe mistakenly that there's no existing literature. And linguistics is a bit of a late bloomer on this front. So it may be that there's no literature on your exact question in linguistics, but there might well be in adjacent disciplines. So disciplines like psychology, sociology, anthropology have well-developed literatures on teaching and learning. So you might want to be consulting the literature on teaching and learning in those fields. And there's also a broader subtle literature, not just linguistics, and probably the staff in your teaching and learning center, the educational developers in your teaching and learning center can help get you connected with some of that foundational literature. So yeah, that's part of doing good scholarship, of course, right? Is connecting to the existing conversation on these topics that's in the literature. And then, of course, we want to know what kind of evidence you have. Why is what you're doing a good idea? What evidence have you got? So again, this might be quantitative data, like, a pre-test, post-test, or grades in this section versus that section. That's a more traditional comparative or experimental design, but qualitative data is also really valuable. So you might be doing written surveys or interviews or focus groups with your students. That might be useful if you've done an innovations paper to just get your students' reactions. If you have your own structured reflections about what you did over the course of a semester or course design, some kind of evidence, not necessarily numbers, for your proposed approach. And then something we care about a lot in this section of the journal is justice issues, equity, diversity, inclusion, not just as a throwaway, like, oh, we looked at race and sex as variables, but to think about what are the ways that your paper addresses making learning more accessible to a variety of diverse kinds of learners, more flexible. So this is going to connect as well to your conversation about your particular context and positionality. So thinking about who are your students, or who are you assuming are the students affected by this intervention or innovation? Who are you assuming are your readers? So to think about these questions in a deep and nuanced way. We ask reviewers to look for that, and so it's wise to think about that in your submission. Okay, back to you, Michal.
Thanks. So now that you know a little bit about the kinds of manuscripts that we're interested in, we hope that you'll consider submitting a manuscript to our section, of course. And since this section is part of language, we accept papers on a rolling basis. There's no specific deadlines for submissions. We do tend to have sort of high seasons for submissions, like we're assuming the next few months are going to be pretty busy for us. And we have some lulls, like this past term has been a sort of nice calm between two storms, right? Between the December storm and the June storm. So additionally, the two of us are more than happy to meet with you and your collaborators. Catherine mentioned that in the review process, we really take a mentorship and formative approach to this. We see ourselves not as gatekeepers, but as mentors in the process. And so we would love to meet with you and your collaborators to talk about prospective submissions. We found that these sort of conversations, we usually have them over Zoom. They're a half-hour long. They really help guide authors in their thinking about how to organize the manuscript and in getting some of their questions answered before they submit. And we've met with folks, before they've even started, and with folks right before they were ready to submit, or they thought they were ready to submit. And so, we really don't mind meeting with you at any stage of your writing process. Importantly, as a practice, we don't look at actual manuscripts in progress. Only the ones that are submitted through the language submissions portal are the ones that we look at. But we also wanted to make sure that we mention this explicitly and that it's on the record. Don't worry if you think there are conflicts of interest, right? So we have plenty of mechanisms in language, being that the language editorial staff is quite large. We have processes and procedures to work with conflict of interest. So if you have any sort of issue or any sort of question about conflict of interest, let us know, and we'll let you know the process that we have. And don't worry about it, and don't not submit because you think you might have a conflict of interest of some sort. Our discipline is so small that we can't let conflict of interest be something that turns away, people who might know people on the editorial staff, for example, right? In the next 2 slides, we'll walk you through the actual review process, just so you're all clear on that. So here we actually read, the associate editor, so Catherine and I actually read and decide on papers as soon as they are submitted. So when you first submit the paper through the official language portal, it's assigned to the 2 of us, and we then read it and decide whether it is ready to be sent over to review or whether it needs to be revised prior to us sending it out. This is usually due to maybe not following the guidelines or missing some information that's critical for review. At this point, we can also decide that the manuscript is not fit for the section. As Catherine mentioned earlier, an example of a desk reject is an article that discusses the teaching of language rather than teaching linguistics. It's very rare that an article about teaching linguistics is rejected at this stage, especially if the authors meet with us prior to submitting the manuscript. But we do have quite a few instances where we send the paper back for some major revisions. I say major, but it's mostly things like layout and organization and making sure that certain things are addressed, like approval by review boards and things like that, just so that the reviewers then can see that the criteria are met, the review criteria are met. Once the article has been sent out for review, reviewers will have about a month to submit the review. We do tend to have, because we have some, because the time that folks submit papers are the times that others are working on their own papers, we do allow our reviewers to request extensions. So sometimes the review process might be a little longer. And once we receive all of the reviews, we then have to decide whether the manuscript is accepted, pending minor revisions, or whether it needs to be revised and resubmitted for review. Or sometimes, unfortunately, whether the issues with it are just too big that it cannot be published and should therefore be rejected. This is an iterative process and can often take multiple review rounds. But as Catherine mentioned, our lens is that of mentors and rather than gatekeepers. So we do try to work with authors as much as is possible to make sure that we do get your good work published in our section. Once an article has been sent out just kidding. Wait, that arrow threw me off. Okay, hang on. Yes, okay. All right, at this point, we have about, 39 minutes left to answer your questions. So we'll stop sharing our screen and we'll take questions in order. So if you want to put the questions in the chat, you can do that, or you can raise your hand using the reaction button and we will call on you. So thank you.
Well, maybe put the final slide that has our email addresses on it back up while people are thinking about their questions. Just give them another couple minutes.
Actually, I'll go ahead and put our emails in the chat. So
sure, even better. Yep. Susan, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. This is really helpful. So the question I have is, I've been thinking about a paper for many years now and should probably actually do something with it. And it has to do with the teaching innovation, something that we've kind of developed over years at Emory for our capstone seminar. And the question that I have is, I do not have IRB approval, so I'm wondering if I can share any information from what the students have written, even if it's just like thesis statements for their final paper or ideas that they've written on, if I'm not using specific language that they've had.
Catherine, is it okay if I answer this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So in the past, thank you, Susan. That's a great question. And we do get that question quite often. This is a class that you've worked on, that you've taught, and, now you're thinking like, this is actually something I want to share with folks. And so there's like this retroactive sort of thing. At my institution, the way that would be treated with our institutional review board is I would request permission to share, it would go through either the exempt or expedited process. And I would ask for permission to share information collected for class purposes. And there's usually a fairly simple process to go through that. Do you have a Center for Teaching and Learning on your campus? Yeah, so So you might want to go there first and ask, hey, does anybody know how do I go about doing this in a way that is fairly smooth, right? Because if you're the first person to do it, or if you're not asking other folks, you could actually get yourself in trouble, right? So for one, either meet with your IRB folks or meet with your Center for Teaching and Learning folks and ask, okay, say I want to write about a paper about blah, 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 about a former class, a past class that I've taught. I would like to be able to use information from student submissions. You can talk about how you will anonymize it. How do I do that retroactively with permission? But we do need to know that your institution is okay with that. Does that cover it all, Catherine? Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
No, I was just saying that's perfect information. That's what I assumed, but I wanted to verify with you guys.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm in Canada, so the context is a little bit different. But yeah, I would ask the ethics board staff to advise me because each institution is going to interpret the policies a bit differently. But our responsibility is to make sure that you have the clearance of your institution, whatever form that clearance takes. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Susan.
We've got some in the chat here, Michal. Apologies for that first link, that your tiny URL link, Michal, is because the LSA website is,
Oh, no.
the links are all broken, but I put the new one here in the chat.
Okay.
So Uboston has asked about mentorship. So maybe I'll start there. So this webinar is one of the pieces of that. Like we would like you to get your work published in Teaching Linguistics. And so part of what we're doing is helping you learn how to do that. And then the next step is, even if you haven't done a project yet, haven't even started writing, you're thinking, I might like to do some scholarship of teaching and learning in this class I'm teaching next semester. You could ask for a meeting with us. We could talk you through that. You probably also have a Center for Teaching and Learning on campus that could help you with the initial stages. But if it's specifically about linguistics, you could request a meeting with us early in the process. If you're about to start writing, that might be when you request your meeting with us. If you're partway through and wondering about how to structure. So the fact that we offer meetings with potential authors is another part of the mentoring. And then that stage of editor review before we send it to the peer reviewers is another part of it. Like we want your paper to be suitable for review. And so this is a less traditional step, but we might ask you to revise it before we even send it out for review because we want it to be publishable. So that's another intervention stage there. And then there's the asking our reviewers also to make their reviews formative and supportive as well. So those are the places where that mentorship is built in to the process. Anything you want to add to that, Michal?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. That's great. And we're really excited about graduate students like you who are interested in publishing. One thing that we like to encourage faculty members is to include their students in co-publishing. That's part of great practices in scholarship of teaching and learning, is to have the student voice represented, not just as a, not only in what they say or what they do in as learners, but also as co-publishers. And we have a paper coming up pretty soon that is co-authored, a grad student with a faculty member. But we have had graduate students as solo publishers as well, as single authors as well. So solo publishers, I don't know where I got that. Single authors.
Okay, thank you so much. And I have one more question about the guidelines that you shared. Can you please share them? Like, is there like a document of guidelines to follow?
So actually,
yeah, if you click that link in the chat, those reviewer guidelines are there. They're on that page.
That's the link that Catherine sent.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha so much.
The languagelsa.org one, yes, yeah. So Michal, do you want to?
Sorry, I just wanted to say one quick thing. So that link takes you to an explanation about our section. The evaluation criteria that we mentioned that we send to our reviewers is not a secret. We share it on this page with everybody because we want folks to know there's no hidden gotcha moments here. We want you to know what that evaluation criteria is. So that's where it's at. Yeah. Catherine, did you want to?
I was going to invite you, Michal, to address Ali's question, and then I will just maybe quickly I'll answer Samrina's. Yeah, there is no cost to authors, Samrina. It is free for authors. Yes. So Ali. You do Ali, and maybe we'll take one spoken question after that.
Perfect. Yeah, so Ali, we would want to probably know a little more about what it is that you're interested in talking about. You know, Catherine mentioned in the presentation that, you know, we're looking at the teaching of linguistics or using linguistic concepts in, you know, in other sort of teachings, but we would want to know more about in what ways, like, what is the intervention here, right? What is the issue that you're solving by using linguistic concepts or using linguistics in this context, so that it's not just that, you know, so it's not, you know, the idea is to avoid, you know, things like, yes, we use second language acquisition theory in the way that we teach ESL, right? And so we want to make sure that we would probably want to know more about this. Like, what is it in particular that you're interested in publishing about? It should be really focused on, you know, an issue that you might be facing or might have faced in the past, an intervention that you're using, and then how is that different from a regular class in that same context? Does that make sense, Ali?
Yes, good idea.
Feel free to email us and ask for a meeting or to give us more information and get our opinions.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, Juan, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, what about corpus-based studies? Is that something that you would consider, or, you know, does it have to do something that you get samples from student populations only?
So corpus, tell us more.
Yeah.
Corpus linguistics, like if
Yeah.
I'm looking at a particular aspect, but my database would be, let's say, for example, research articles.
But
About teaching linguistics?
I can give you a more specific example. I'm
Yeah.
working on something right now about the use of self-mentions in research articles, specifically in the discussion section of research articles. And I will be addressing the teaching implications for that, especially for second language writers.
So I'm not hearing the teaching part. So
Yeah.
what about this is related to teaching? Like how is it related to the teaching of linguistics?
Like I said, it's a corpus-based study, so I'm not going to do any experiment with any group of students.
Right.
So only in the discussion section and the pedagogical implications, I will address the teaching of self-mentions for publication.
Yeah, so that seems more like a professional development sort of thing, right? So like the way that we teach students about publishing, right? I'm not sure, Catherine, this particular example is not striking me as something that's, you know, with this much information, it's not striking me as.
That's something I would want to know more, or if you think this is the right venue, then convince us that, like, that's the first thing to do. That first question is this about teaching linguistics, right? Rebecca in the chat has suggested an alternate journal that might also be the right venue, so you could look into that. Yeah, the primary question is this about teaching linguistics? And if it's about teaching research or writing skills in general to student researchers, then this might not be the right venue. But
Thank you.
we hope you find the right venue.
One quick thing I wanted to mention before we take the next question is that we have a database that's online. One of the biggest pet peeves for, at least for me, is when we get an article that starts off with, no research has ever been done in linguistics about teaching, right? It's especially, you know, I've been working as the associate editor of Teaching Linguistics for 7 years, right? We have articles. And so we don't want you to take on that sort of attitude, right? And we want to give you the resources to be able to cite other articles that have been published. So I went ahead and put in the chat, we have an online database that we try to keep up as much as possible of articles published in our section of language, so in the Teaching Linguistics section of language, but also in the Teaching American Speech issue every year. So the summer issue of American Speech, the Journal of the American Dialect Society, they also have teaching articles there. And so feel free to use this as a way to broaden your access to what has been done in linguistics. There are papers in there from as early as 2008. And so you can actually start, we finally have, you know, enough stuff out there that you can actually reference things and say, oh, this is something that worked in 2008. Here's how I might intervene, for an issue, that same issue now.
So Heidi's asking, do you consider psycholinguistics? As a teacher of psycholinguistics, I do. Yeah. So yes, I would be interested in that. So my first reaction, obviously, all depends on the context, but yes, psycholinguistics is part of linguistics.
Computational
in my
linguistics is
experience-
part of linguistics.
Yeah.
In your experience, sorry, Catherine.
Oh yeah, in my experience, the distinction I make between psychology of language and psycholinguistics on a campus where both are offered as separate courses is that psycholinguistics pays attention to the linguistics part of it and doesn't just treat language as behavior. So that's my own pedagogical and institutional context. Yeah. Yes. The website mentions an amount. I don't know. So Ellie, there is no article publishing charge. No, I don't know what amount you're looking at.
It
Is that
might
just
be
subscribe to the
an
journal?
amount. There may be there's a 2-year, V might be able to help us with this.
Okay, no.
So there's a 2-year embargo on papers. So they're behind a paywall through JSTOR. And so there is a way to pay for your article to be open access from the very beginning.
Oh,
That-
I see. Okay.
I
Yeah.
believe that's the case. So I'm not sure if V
Oh,
is
yeah.
looking into this right now. Yeah, there you go.
I'm not aware of the technicality of how that works, but yes, they are available at this stage exclusively for LSA members in the first 2 years. And past that, we have an open access platform that you guys can read these articles afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, so authors can opt to pay to have the paywall removed in those first 2 years.
Samrina is asking, could Michal and I be added as co-authors? Not unless we helped you write the paper. So no, so the mentoring or advice that we offer does not give us authorship status. It's your research. Yeah.
But you can work with your faculty members and have them be second or third authors on your.
Yes, that's good advice.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. We have a question from Chris about research versus innovations article categories. Can the research pieces have some component of discussions of innovative curriculums? Please. Absolutely. Yes. And including uptake for broader pedagogical context. And if so, what balance do you recommend of empirical data discussion versus description of curriculum / teaching approaches? So wondering, for example, if discussion of curriculum or teaching approaches needs to be kept to a minimum if it's in the research category. No, that is not the case. So we definitely want this is the teaching linguistics section, right? We want you to discuss your teaching and your pedagogical approach. And if you're writing a research paper, there's going to be evidence to back it, right? There's going to be evidence to support your approach, but it does not mean that we don't want to hear about the pedagogical approach. I will say this. So Catherine mentioned the length of the articles. The research articles can be up to 12,000 words, whereas I was going to say pages. No, 12,000 words. That would be awful. Versus the 10,000 for innovations. The reason that we have a distinction between the two in length is that we started the innovations manuscript type as a way to address, what if somebody has used a really good intervention and it's shown to work or not. I mean, that's also possible, right? But they don't have data, right? They just want to be able to show what the main issue was, why they chose their innovation. The innovation, by the way, the word innovation is kind of murky, right? It sounds like shiny new thing, right? But the innovation could be based on something that's been done outside our field. It could be based on something that's been done in our field in a different sort of circumstance, or it could be the use of actual linguistic theory and application in teaching. So something that could then be used for other people teaching outside of linguistics to use linguistic methodology to assist in their pedagogical methods. So the idea of corpus linguistics, for example, I love the idea of using corpora, right, in assessment, right? So for folks who are teaching, writing, for example, right, and who have 120 students a semester, the ability to use corpora to, and corpus linguistic methods to improve the teaching of writing is really cool, right? In this case, it would not be teaching linguistics, but if you taught linguistics using corpora and you see applications for it in other fields outside of linguistics, you could then publish this in teaching linguistics, but talk about the way that you believe this is a game changer for, for other fields as well.
I had to mute myself. There's some background noise here.
Mizuki has a question, it looks like.
Yeah, so Bharati had asked average time of publication, like from submission to publication. Is that the question?
Yes.
I will let Michal handle that one.
A big sigh and a lot of asterisks involved, right? So it really depends. I haven't looked to try and mathematically calculate this. Because we take this as a mentorship opportunity, sometimes like we said, we'll send you the paper back before we even send it out to review. That might make it longer by like 3 or 4 weeks. When you send it back, it's the second round already. It's not considered a brand new manuscript unless we asked you to submit a brand new manuscript, right? And so that's already 4 weeks later, or longer if you need more time. We give time to our reviewers if they need extensions. We need time to read. And one thing that we missed in the description of the review process is that once we are done and we make our decision, the editors of the journal, so Shalom Gooden, and I don't know why I just stuttered on that, Shalom Gooden and John Beavers are the 2 editors of language, and they both read the papers, and they have more to say in addition to our own comments, which has been wonderful. It's been really great to get their feedback as well, but that could take an additional month as well. And so if, so it's a very variable process, and I don't have the actual number, but it could take a while. So one of the things that we ask when folks meet with us for a Zoom conversation before they submit, we will ask them, or usually they volunteer this information and they'll say, oh, I'm going up for promotion next year. I would really like to have this having been reviewed and have at least a decision by the time I go up for promotion. And we really try our best to then make sure that on our end, we are speeding it up as much as possible. When we get the reviews, we try to be really conscientious of that. So we are conscientious of the fact that, people don't publish because they want to, and they want to take 30 years to publish an article. We want to make sure that we make it as quick as possible, but sometimes we have delays because an author, for example, a reviewer, disappears, does not answer our emails anymore. And so we have to look for a different reviewer, and that takes another month, right? So we try our best to speed up the process wherever we can. One of the things about meeting with us over Zoom is that once we've met with you and we have a pretty general idea of what your project entails, we can actually start thinking about who might be a good reviewer for your paper. And so then when you submit, we don't have to read the paper to know who to send it to, right? We'll still read it, but we don't then have to sort of hem and haw about like, okay, where do we send this to? So yeah, I hope that explained things. And also then once a paper gets approved and accepted by the editors, there's the copy editing stage. And then we have to wait till there's space in an issue, right? So that hasn't been a problem for us. There hasn't been a backlog in once the manuscript makes it into the copy editing stage. And so, but it's still, language is published every 3 months, and they pretty much need to know what goes into the next issue 4 months in advance. So I hope that tells you something, even though I've given you no information.
Well, may I say, tell me if this is accurate, Michal, it would never be less than 6 months,
Yes.
right? So 6 months or more, we could say that much at least, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know about the average, but
Yeah.
yes, 6 months it seems like a pretty quick turnaround.
That would be fast. Yeah. Yeah. Mitsuki has a question about activities done outside of class. Yeah, so yes, teaching linguistics need not be in a formal university classroom. Anywhere that you are teaching linguistics counts as linguistics pedagogy. That would be delightful. Yeah, a club. Ooh, linguistics club.
Yeah, we would want to know about the context and like
Yes.
why, but yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, yes, tell us what the context is. And so you'll think about your context, and then you'll want to not convince, but tell the readers how this is applicable to their context, right? But yeah, we wouldn't rule it out just because it's not in a university classroom.
Absolutely. The next question is from Hyun-suk, and the question is about the acceptance rate. This is another murky answer for you. I've not actually looked at the actual numbers, but as we mentioned in the presentation, we have, papers that are rejected on the onset for just not meeting the criteria or not being in the right for the section or for language. I will say this, the rejection rate of papers where the authors have spoken with us and have met with us, and when we said, yes, this sounds like a good paper, you should go ahead and write it and submit it, is very, very low. The rejection rate is very, very low. It is absolutely rare for us to have met with you, have discussed with you that, the paper does have merit and could be in the, is a good fit in a journal. And then for it to be, well, flat out rejected or even rejected after review. But I will say this is very important. We are a peer review journal, right? And it is double-blind peer review. And so meeting with us does not mean that your paper will automatically be accepted. It's just that usually when we meet with folks, so it's not the case that every person that we meet with actually ends up submitting the paper, right? We turn people to other venues in situations where the paper would not be a good fit before they submit the paper. So it may not be the case that our acceptance rate is low if we just look at, submitted versus accepted or rejected, but it's because we work with you throughout the process and we try to dissuade you from submitting to us to begin with if the paper is not going to be a good fit, if it doesn't meet the guidelines. Yes. Is it Kiara or Chiara?
Kiara.
Okay. Thank you. So your question is about whether or not you need to currently be teaching linguistics or if you could use past teaching experiences. Absolutely. You can use past experiences as well. That's absolutely good. And we'd love to hear more about your homeschooling and private tutoring. If you'd like to, we could meet with you about that and see how that might be something that could be publishable. Yes, thank you for that.
For those questions about, well, what about my context? Is this acceptable? The thing to keep in mind is that most of the readers of the journal are teaching linguistics in universities. And so if it's not that you have to be, but you want the reader to be able to figure out what's applicable to their own context from your context. So you'll do the work of describing your context and showing how it extends or applies to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're very much interested in teaching linguistics in K through 12 environments. We do have a growing number of members of the LSA who are teachers in the K through 12 context, and a growing number of university faculty and students who are working in the K-12, and collaborating with K-12 teachers. And so there is a growing interest in that in the LSA. We would just want to make sure, as Catherine said, that there's a way for us to talk about, how is this applicable to others in our setting. And also, I will say this as well, linguists in industry, right? There are linguists in industry who are working very hard to train our students, our undergrads and our grad students on industry jobs, right? And on applying linguistics in industry. And so we are currently working with some authors who are interested in looking at how to talk about, right, the training that linguists need in order to go into industry, but partnering then with universities to provide that training, not just saying, here's what's missing from linguists who are out there in non-academic jobs, right? So that's really important. Mizuki, do you want to unmute and tell us about your question so that I'm not answering a whole bunch of things that are not related?
So about teaching about linguistics and not teaching linguistics, like talking to young K-12 about the field, rather than teaching IPAs or constituencies, but like the fields, because I think a lot of people need to know what this field is out there.
Yes, so we have published papers on outreach activities. So again, we'd want to know more about this, right? And we'd want to talk to you more about this before you submit a paper. But the idea of teaching linguistics as outreach, right? So going into the schools and, for example, I worked with an AP Spanish teacher, right? Where we went in and we taught phonetics and we taught the differences between the pronunciation of standard American English and standard American Spanish. And we showed students like, what are the best ways to sound like a gringo, right? When you're speaking Spanish, right? And so, or I went in and spoke with elementary school students who were putting on a Shakespeare play, but they were doing it using a certain dialect from New England, right? And so I taught them the phonetics of that dialect, right? So that sort of thing could be innovative, right? But if we're just going into the high schools and telling them, hey, you should major in linguistics, this is a really cool field, it's wonderful, we're really happy that you're doing that, but it probably wouldn't work for this section. So please, but talk to us about it. Let us know what the kinds of things that you're doing and how we can,
Thank you.
get through. Thank you, Mizuki. All right. Are there any more questions? This is great. I'm so glad so many of you are here today. Great to see familiar faces, great to see new names and new faces.
It's exciting that so many people are interested in writing about their teaching of
Yes,
linguistics. Yeah.
yes. Oh, I promised I would, I need to plug something during this. So I'm going to go look for the link for that. Catherine, talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to say because we've said most of it, but it really is a delight to have so many people interested. And Michal did put the link to our slides up in the chat. So before you close your Zoom, you might want to click through if you wanted to look at the slides. Pretty much everything that's in the slides, the stuff about the journal is also on the journal homepage. So you can bookmark that and cherish it close to your heart. That's in my list of top links. I just put L and that's what comes up in my browser. Okay. Have you got your thing that you're plugging, Michal?
I had to do the dual security, blah, blah, blah. Log back into my email. I'm so sorry. I'll be in a second.
Two-factor authentication.
Two-factor.
Yes, it trips me up so often. It's also really exciting to me that there are people from so many different places besides the US.
Absolutely. Definitely. There it is. Okay. Whew. Okay. So there is a workshop happening in the month of July, the workshop on scholarly teaching and SOTL in linguistics. I'm sorry, Catherine, I didn't ask you if this was okay.
Please, go ahead.
But we're building on momentum from past conferences and organized sessions at the LSA. And this is for folks who are interested in looking at submitting some of their teaching materials to a new online teaching repository that we're naming Trill. It's a teaching resource and innovations library for linguistics. It's based on the American Sociological Association's Trails, which is their teaching resource library. And during this 5-week-long online workshop, we'll be working on creating submissions for the repository, and we'll be launching it at the annual meeting in Philadelphia. Is that where it is? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, good. And so if folks are interested, I posted the link to the interest form. There is a stipend involved in participating in the workshop, and we'll be creating webinar information and things like that for future folks who are interested in submitting this. So this is great if you have some teaching materials that you'd like to share with others, but that isn't necessarily a manuscript. This is a great way to do that. And with that, let me just say one thing that we didn't mention in the presentation is that one additional sort of difference between the research papers and the innovations in teaching papers is that the innovations papers usually include with them supplemental materials like an annotated syllabus and handouts and assignments in a way that is not expected from a research paper, right? So if you're sharing an innovation, we want to see what you actually created to share with students. So that's there. Okay.
Anything else while we're here?
Since we're talking about the LSA 2025 annual meeting, can I also put in 2 plugs, please? Just build on Michal's point earlier. Yes, we are going to Philadelphia for the 2025 LSA annual meeting. So I look forward to seeing you there. It will be from January the 9th to the 12th. And in case you are interested, we are also inviting organization proposal. If you have a project that you like to feature during the program, I will put both links in the chat for your convenience. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fee.
And I know that both the linguistics in the school curriculum and linguistics in higher ed committees are definitely interested in putting in some special sessions, some organized sessions. So there'll be lots of things about teaching at the, and for those of you who were there at the annual meeting this year and last year as well, there is an increasing number of sessions about teaching, organized and regular sessions as well. So, and there is a category for teaching linguistics abstracts. So if you want to submit a work in progress as a paper presentation or a poster presentation for the annual meeting, and then later on publish it in language, that is not a conflict.
Mhm.
Great. All right. Well,
Yes.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you for coming. Vee has put those links. So yeah, you might want to just open up all those tabs in your browser before you leave the Zoom. But otherwise, we will wish you a lovely rest of your day or evening, wherever you are, whatever
Or night.
time zone you're in. And we'll hope to meet some of you over email or meetings later on. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming and joining us today, everyone. Thanks, Michal and Catherine.
Thank you.